safety meeting combined with our finance and accounting audit committee meeting, and calling the meeting to order. If you would please stand for the pledge of allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I think we're going to go right to the agenda. Chairman Harden is also included on the agenda as well. So if there is anything that you have, Director Harden, please don't hesitate to share with us.
Well, thank you.
Okay. The second item on the agenda are our public comments. Danielle, do we have any comments at this time?
Committee Chair Williams, can we do roll call first?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and do that first. Please say here after your name is called. Director Williams.
Here.
Director Mechanic.
Here.
Director Kemp. Director McLean.
Here.
Director Overman. Director Schisler.
Here.
Director Harden.
Here.
Director Knight. You have a quorum.
Has joined the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Danielle. Are we poised to move forward with our public comments at this time?
There actually was nobody pre-registered for public comment.
Okay, thank you.
But Committee Chair, I don't know if you want Miss Julia Mandel to read into the record the rules for committee participation for virtual meetings.
Yes, please.
Thank you and good morning. We appreciate your participation in the virtual meeting. The change of meeting location from in-person HART Administrative Office to virtual meeting is pursuant to Executive Order Number 20-69, issued by the Governor of the State of Florida on March 20th, 2020, and Section 120.54 Florida statutes has been readopted. Due to social distancing, the boardroom of the e-board administrative office is only accessible for personnel facilitating the meeting. Please keep your devices and phones muted when not speaking. Muting the sound and the microphone on your device helps avoid feedback. Please do not enable the video camera on your device and discontinue all personal conversations during the meeting. Please follow along with a copy of the meeting agenda and materials sent via email. All presentations will be given on screen while presented. Roll call will be taken for attendance and voting by HART staff. Quorum and voting results will be announced. Please wait to announce your attendance until your name is called during the roll call. Also, please be mindful of when they call for votes so that you will not be marked absent at vote. There will be an opportunity for members of the public who are registered with HART staff to provide comments, although I understand there are no public comments for this meeting. During the meeting, please wait until the chair asks for comments or questions from the committee board members for each agenda item as the meeting progresses through the agenda. When you want to provide a comment or ask a question, please signal that you wish to do so by activating the hand button, which is in the white circle next to the name on your screen. The hand will turn blue when activated. Staff will read the hands raised in order for the chair to acknowledge, then the participant may unmute their device and speak. Please speak your name before you comment. Presenters, please note that all presentations will be controlled by HART staff. Ensure that you state your name, title, and company or organization for the record. Please say next slide when you need, and staff will progress through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mandel. We will now move forward to our presentations. We have several of those, and the first presentation is on monthly safety and security update, April 2020, and our Director of Safety, Colin Malloy, will present the material at this time. I'll hand it over to you, Colin.
Okay.
Committee Chair Williams, is it possible, so our interim CEO, Ms. Carolyn House Stewart, has a video that our team has put together. We would like to play that before Mr. Malloy's presentation, if that is okay with you.
That's great for me. Thank you.
Absolutely.
While the world stood still, you kept moving. You didn't stop. From the front lines to the garage, HART essential workers kept Hillsborough County moving every day. You made sure our essential workers got their jobs. You took students to schools to pick up free meals. You transported our most vulnerable population to their regular
Why is it?
healthcare appointments. You kept our team and this community safe by disinfecting vehicles and facilities. You protected yourselves and you exercised personal responsibility. During uncertain times, HART essential workers have shown courage, compassion, and commitment. We recognize you've made sacrifices of your own to help us. HART will continue to work with our local unions to keep all of our employees working through these uncertain times and challenges as they take care of their families. We're grateful for your service. Thank you isn't enough. And while HART's mission isn't over, we're working with mutual respect to reset, recover, and restore. We use this moment to recognize those who've never stopped. Heroes work here.
Thank you. Ms. Malloy, we'll hand it off to you at this point.
Thank you, Director Williams. Again, my name is Colin Malloy. I'm the Director of Safety and Security with HART, and I am here to provide the monthly safety and security update covering the month of April in 2020. Next slide. Again, we will start by talking about an analysis of the accidents, but also then transitioning to the security events through our verbal and physical altercations, close with different action items that we are working on, and then open up to any questions that the committee may have. Next slide. So this slide breaks down the accidents that we saw in the month of April. One of the things I would like to point out is that you're going to see an overall pretty significant decrease in the amount of accidents that we saw in the month of April. I want to share with the committee a couple things that go into that. Just as a reminder, on April 1st, at the beginning of the month, is when we started the modified service in relationship to COVID. So our total level of service out on the road was smaller than previous months. Also, if you recall, the stay-at-home orders were going into effect around the period of April. So those did have effects to our overall accidents. And what we roughly saw is, approximately a 50% decrease in our total accidents that we saw, with significant decreases in third-party vehicles hitting our buses, as well as being rear-ended by buses. And that's just, there was less vehicles out on the road during that period of time of April. So one of the things that did remain somewhat constant was the fixed object and mirror collisions that we saw. Our para service, which is traditionally low, we have great operators on our para side as well as our bus side. So we have very few of those, again, low dollar value type of fixed object collisions. Our streetcar, what we really saw, no significant accidents, but we did have some contact with a bicyclist, a bicycle that was actually kind of left out on the tracks in terms of some of the movement down there along. But low dollar value, no injury, nothing to report like that. But we did want to let the committee know that there was some basic activity with the streetcar. So again, in summary, when we look at our accidents, April, we saw a significant decrease, so it's a little bit of a variation from what our trending normally is, but that's directly related to COVID, as well as the stay-at-home order, where the number of overall trips that were occurring, both our side and the public, were significantly down. Next slide.
Question, Chair?
Oh.
Hey, Colin, just a question. You mentioned, and I agree with you, that COVID and our level of services decreased. Do you have a percentage of the level of service decrease that we executed? Was it 50%? Was it 60%? The only reason I ask that is because you highlighted that we were down about 50% in overall accidents, and I would hate to correlate that.
It's, you know, the numbers do kind of correlate. It was roughly about a 50% decrease, so it does correlate with the amount of service. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So now talking about our security events with our physical and verbal altercations to share with the board. I'm happy to comment again, as we've been talking, we had no physical altercations with any of our bus operators, which is a trend that's continued on throughout the last quarter. I reported each month of, we have not seen these physicals. We have seen, a little bit of an increase on the verbal altercations, and what I want to point out here is it's related to COVID as well, is that the verbal altercations that we're seeing are not necessarily occurring on the bus, but they're occurring at our transit centers, such as Marion Transit Way, UATC, Net Park. And what we're finding is that as the stay-at-home order took in place, there's been an increase in loitering and some of those quality of life of non-HART passengers at some of our facilities that we've been working through that have had some verbal altercations. And as a reflection of this, you actually see an increase in the number of trespasses that we've had to issue. So April was actually one of the highest months that we've had in terms of trespasses that we've had to issue. And again, that is not related specifically to on our bus or what our bus operators are experiencing as they're moving HART vehicles. It's occurring at the transit centers where we've seen an increase just in some of these quality of life of non-HART passengers. With that, I want you to know we have not been remaining silent on this. We have been actively working with community partners of how we can help with some of these non-HART passenger issues. HART obviously is not going to be able to solve all items, but we are members of the community and we want to act as such. And we have worked with different organizations, for example, along the Marion Transit Way, as they work with some of the non-HART passengers in that area. And we've had some really great success, and we're looking for continuing those partnerships with both law enforcement, community entities, and some of the nonprofits along there. We've been working pretty diligently with them, because we saw these numbers going up, and it wasn't, again, specific to bus transports, but non-HART passengers at some of our facilities. Next slide. And then just some action items. I wanted to share with you that we are working with the Transportation Security Administration. In June, they came out and did a threat and vulnerability assessment specifically for HART. This is a continuation of HART's commitment to constantly be evaluating our security posture as it relates to both our employees and the public, looking at both our facilities and our operations. We're hoping to get the TVA sometime in June and August, and we'll be happy to kind of share some of that preliminary information with this committee. It also is going to be very helpful, this TVA, with different emergency exercises with TSA in preparation for the Super Bowl. So HART is already looking at how do we prepare for some of these larger events and some of the unique circumstances that are occurring, and we'll again continue to keep this committee informed. The post-event refresher training is ongoing, so as an operator or any HART employee for that matter should have a safety event, the safety department and the training department as well as ops are meeting individually with them, counseling and providing coaching. On June 10th, I highlighted some of the work we had done with the nonprofit, government entities, law enforcement, on some of the loitering and quality of life issues with non-HART passengers along the Marion Transit Way. On June 10th is when we actually had that meeting, very positive meeting. It's been continuing, and we're really looking forward to that partnership. We're reviewing our data so that all the decisions we make in terms of our corrective action plans are based on data. Continuing, we have a streetcar tabletop exercise for hurricane season prep going on June 26th. And we are also working on a human trafficking program in terms of kicking that off this summer and into the fall. So those are some of the action items that we have ongoing, as well as the day-to-day items that both the ops, safety, and all of HART takes on a daily basis. So with that, I would open up to any questions that the committee may have.
Are there any questions?
No, ma'am, there are no hands up.
Thank you.
Committee Chair Williams, we cannot hear you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see.
Now we can hear you. Yes, ma'am.
You can hear me now? Thank you. Mr. Drainfield, you are now recognized to present your Maintenance Department Fleet Overview.
Good morning, committee members. Scott Drainfield, Deputy Chief of Maintenance and Facilities for HART. So in addition to the maintenance activities provided in the monthly board report, the maintenance team collects and reviews an extensive amount of data to closely monitor the efficiency of the fleet. And we do this by utilizing our Enterprise Asset Management, or EAM, and FleetWatch software systems. Next slide. So in this presentation, I'll be sharing a broad overview of the fleet side in the maintenance department, covering the current active fleet profile, fleet maintenance staff, some fleet statistics, monthly performance, some technology comparisons, parts replacement plans, and at the end, I'll take any questions. Next slide. So HART operates and maintains a total of 333 vehicles. When you break that down, we have 184 transit buses with an average age of 7.5 years. 80 of those buses have passed their useful life, and we currently have 0 on order. We do have 85 paratransit vans with an average age of just under 5 years. We currently have 43 vans on order with a scheduled build date between August and October with a goal of 8 per week. We also have 64 non-revenue vehicles with an average age of just under 8 years, and 46 of those assets are fast. Next slide, please. The maintenance has a total of 140 employees. We run a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation. We have 40 fleet technicians and 6 body shop technicians. So when it comes to accurate staffing levels, we use these standard vehicle spec ratios with contributing factors of actual miles driven and the average age of the fleet. The industry standard in our peers in the state of Florida are between 3 and 5 to 1. Ours is currently on an 8 to 1 ratio. We also have 16 service attendants that fuel wash and probe vehicles each night. They are required to hold a CDL, and not including the non-revenue vehicles, we're at a 17 to 1 ratio. We also have 8 full-time fleet custodians and 1 part-time. We are approved for an additional 7. Fleet custodians clean, detail, and sanitize vehicles each day. Currently at a 42 to 1 ratio, the additional 7 would bring that down to 21 to 1. Next slide, please. So when utilizing federal funding to purchase and maintain vehicles, the FTA does have requirements we must comply with. Minimum vehicle useful life is one of those requirements. And for a 40-foot bus, it's 12 years or 500,000 miles. For a paratransit van, it's 5 years, 150,000 miles. And for non-revenue, it's 4 years or 100,000 miles. Our diesel buses average 50,000 miles annually. That brings that 12 years down to 10.2. The CNG buses average 62,000 miles annually. It brings that down to 8.8 years. So for FY19, actual miles driven, just over 12 million miles. We consumed 1.5 million gallons of diesel, 1 million gallons of CNG per diesel gallon equivalent, and just under 13,000 repair orders were open. Next slide, please. So this dashboard is created each month, and it breaks down in depth the most common KPI in transit. It's MDBF, or mean distance between failure. It shows our goal. It breaks down each mode and our combined monthly totals, vehicles with the highest failure rates, our daily reported road calls, and the pie chart breaks down each subfleet and how they contribute to the monthly road call. At the bottom, it shows us the top reported road call defects for the month. And for example, if we had a lot of fume complaints, we could look back at this dashboard as a quick reference to look if we had any exhaust or fume issues. Next slide, please. Again, this graph just represents how we are trending month to month with our MDBF, and it shows both modes, fixed route and paratransit. Next slide. Preventive maintenance, or PM compliance. This is a KPI that FTA and FDOT look closely at during audits. We are required to meet a monthly on-time completion percentage of 80%. We have a 6,000-mile interval between scheduled inspections with a 10% window, or 600 miles on each side, that be considered on time. 600 miles might sound like a lot of miles, but HART's buses average 210 miles daily, and sometimes as many as 300 miles. You can see by this graph, we hit 100% in the last 3 months. Next slide. Fleet availability is another KPI we use in transit. Our goal is in line with the industry standard of having 85% of the fleet available during the peak pullout. These are our main numbers, and because of the reduced service, you can see we far exceeded that goal. But during normal service levels, we do struggle to meet that goal. Next slide, please. So here's a miles per gallon comparison. Here we break down each subfleet. Not a significant difference when it comes to the miles per gallon driven, but we average 94 cents per diesel gallon equivalent on the CNG side, and then for May it was $1.26 on the diesel. Normally diesel trends around $1.80 between $1.90. Next slide. Again, fuel cost per mile, we break down each subfleet. This is our May data. Breaks down the miles driven and the fuel consumed. Next slide, please. So in 2019, HART CNG buses saved 2,200 tons of greenhouse gases and just over 29,000 barrels of oil. I do want to thank Michael Graves, our environmental program manager, for confirming these numbers. And the graph just shows 3 different scenarios. We had all diesel, all CNG, and in the middle shows our current status. Next slide, please. Technology cost per mile. Now, this is just strictly labor and parts. HART averages about 20 cents a mile at CNG, the diesel at 40 cents. I also want to thank Henry at PSTA for providing this information on diesel electric hybrids running at 43 cents a mile, and their 2 battery electric buses running at 53 cents a mile. Next slide. This is a HART's fixed route replacement plan. On this table, you can see everything highlighted has passed its useful life, and it just breaks down the model year, the replacement year, number of buses in the fleet, number on order, average miles, and the projected price. 540 is the last quoted projected price, base price of the team. The next slide, please. And this shows our paratransit replacement, same format, but what's highlighted is past its useful life. Only difference here is this shows the 43 vehicles that are on order. Next slide. And that concludes the presentation. If we have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Drainville. We'll open it up for questions now.
Councilmember Schisler has his hand up.
Councilmember Trishler, you are recognized.
Good morning. Good report, Scott. I do have a question. You indicated there are no buses on order. Unless I'm having a senior moment, I thought we had approved an order for 10 buses. They might even have been electric. Or was this tied to the tax referendum that's stuck in the courts?
Well, we have nothing on all. We did apply for some grants for 10 electric buses and a NOLO grant that we were just recently notified we did not get awarded. But no, there's no buses on order at the present time.
Okay, thank you. Now your data is good. There's some good nerdy stuff in it.
Commissioner Kemp is next.
Thank you. Thank you. So I also had the same, I thought outside of even a grant, the NOLO grant, that we had a match by FDOT for a number of CNG buses on our fleet. That you're saying the only thing we had out there was a NOLO grant?
Yes, we were awarded a grant, but we're still looking for the match.
Okay, so we have a grant to buy buses that we're looking for a match for. Is that what you're saying, to get 10 CNG buses?
Chair Williams, this is Cindy Stiglich. May I speak?
Yes, please.
Thank you. For the record, Cindy Stiglich, interim CFO for HART. Yes, we did receive the Bus and Bus Facilities discretionary grant. It was a $4.3 million grant.
Exactly.
That required a $750,000 match, for which we, are looking for that local match in order to purchase those 10 buses.
Okay, so HART can just make the $750,000 match, and we can buy 10 buses. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so $750,000. So we just include that in our budget for the upcoming year, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so we do have then 10 CNG vehicles, is it?
It should afford us almost 10. At $540,000 a bus, it's a little over 9, depending upon the options. But yes, essentially 9 to 10 buses.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when will we get those?
If Scott were to place the order, and that contract, I believe we've already brought that to the board for contract. So if he were to place that order, and he can speak better to this time frame, but typically it's from 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
That is correct.
Right. Hello?
Yes, and that is correct. They were promising a 12 months because of the factory closing down because of the pandemic. It's between 14 and 18 months.
Okay. And so why wasn't that included in this presentation?
Because I haven't started any talks with Gillig about this order.
Right. Well, I think it's important that we have synergies here between our finances and our budget and this. And so we're told we have 80 pass buses, and at some point we need to merge these two and understand that it's our budget decision. $750,000 is de minimis for 10 new buses. So it just would seem that should be a highlight and a focus of us on our budget in the upcoming year, for certain. And that we should understand that this is available. On this presentation too, can we go back to the well, there's at one point you said about 10.2, or you were talking about 150 million miles for these buses, correct? And a 12-year life is a standard, but in our market or at HART, we have buses that are meeting a different useful life. And can you go back to that slide?
So that's slide 5.
Okay. But we have it. So the typical useful life that is projected will be 12 years, which is what I've heard. But then what you said is the diesel buses fleet is 10.2 years, and our CNG is 8.8 years, and that's because why?
It's because it's either 12 years or 500,000 miles, whichever comes first. So we're averaging 500,000 miles in those years.
And I would imagine that the regional buses, which are, again, when we do those, and not to say that we shouldn't be doing any, but the longer the route is, and we have these low efficiency routes with low numbers and very costly that we're doing, and there's all the talk about doing more, but these will use our buses more quickly and make their useful lives shorter. Therefore, the cost of those routes in terms of our bus, just our bus capital is much higher, correct?
But, so, maintenance budget is on actual miles, not revenue miles. So that's what drives the maintenance, and either the maintenance, scheduling of the maintenance and the budget is actual miles, not revenue miles.
Right. I understand, and that's why I think it should be. That's the way it should be. And these actual miles are showing that we're using our buses more with these long routes that are low efficiency and that are very are not nearly used like our frequent shorter routes, local routes, even to USF and downtown, that are strong routes that serve many more riders. But let's go to the next slide after that, the carbon footprint slide. I guess it's further down, the carbon footprint slide.
Slide 12.
Yeah, I guess. Okay, slide 12. So here's, with that, you're missing a huge area here, which is you've got diesel, you've got CNG, but you have no electric in there. So if you have an electric in there, and the other thing that you don't put in there is the greenhouse gas caused by fracked gas. So you only include in here petroleum usage, so diesel. You do not include the greenhouse gas impacts of CNG in here at all, and you don't put electric buses in this calculation, which all of it would be much different if you did that.
So I don't have accurate data because we don't own electric buses. So this is data I'm reporting on that we know.
Okay. But maybe we can then at least make it accurate in terms of having a fracked gas greenhouse gas impact, because we do have those, and they do have an impact. But you only include petroleum impacts.
Mr. Drainfield, is there an action for us to take as a result of Commissioner Kemp's feedback?
No, this is strictly educational. I just want to, I have a 30-year career in transit, and the mission and goal was always to provide safe, reliable, clean sanitary service. If greenhouse gases is going to be the first major issue why we can buy electric vehicles, and we need to know that. We have a lot of concerns about electric vehicles.
I understand. I'm not trying to have we've had discussions about electric vehicles before, but I'm just saying when you put this footprint out that, it could be accurate in terms of the greenhouse gas impacts on this, just to show us of fracked gas, and not just have it be petroleum, because petroleum is just about diesel, and so of course it's going to be zero if you're not using diesel on fracked gas buses, CNG buses. So I'm just saying to make so that we can see, it'd be good to have the greenhouse gas impacts. I'm not saying that, just when you give this overview of the carbon footprint, I didn't put the carbon footprint overview up there. So I just would like it to include the carbon footprint of CNG as well.
So generic, you mean generic carbon footprint? Because, like I said, this is data that we know of. We don't have any data specific on electric buses to offer.
I wasn't even asking about electric buses. Even if you put this up here, can you please put up, instead of just petroleum usage, if you could put up the greenhouse gas impact, because that's what you have here, of CNG.
Okay, I'm sure we can put something together.
Right, I'd appreciate that. That would be good, because that would be more accurate about what we have here, the carbon footprint.
So, Mr. Drainfield, will you take that as a follow-up and come back to the the board at a later time to talk to us about the differences and all inputs, whether they be available to you or not. Maybe there's an opportunity to normalize that and compare it against what we have here today.
I sure will.
Thank you. Councilman Schuessler, you're recognized. Excuse me.
Thank you. This is a follow-up question for both Cindy and Scott. With regards to the allocation of funds for the match, do you require any board action for this?
Cindy, I'll defer that to you.
Okay, thank you. This is Cindy. As far as we've already brought to the board the request to purchase, I believe it was back when we were preparing for the sales tax influx, and we had brought the proposition of buying 40 buses at that time. We did not delineate, I believe, any other funding source other than sales tax, as that was the primary source of buying 40 buses. So during the budget process, when we bring to you the budget for approval, we will incorporate the it's actually $758,000. We will incorporate that into the use of general fund in order to provide that match.
Okay, so this will be an upcoming budget issue for this year, and we'll have an opportunity to get you the funding that you need to complete this transaction. Okay,
yes, that would be the appropriate time. Thank you.
Councilman Schuessler, I think that's a very good point that you're bringing forth, because we were looking at, we have a combined meeting now that has operations and safety, and then we also have finance committee, and we're approaching these individually, although we're combining committee. Is there any way to show that crossover where there's a dependency, so that we are very much aware of, in the event there's something that is waiting funding, that maybe that is a call out or a line item that we could refer to at a later time during the session?
Yes.
Thank you. Is that your reference, Councilor?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. Cindy, is there a way to make sure that we can reference those, because it feels like we're having these conversations separately, but they're very much intertwined, thus our session today?
No, I believe that any time where you're going to be approving, whether it's a grant or a contract, even if it is something that's only presented, say to the Operations and Safety Committee, if it does have a financial impact, I completely agree that it needs to be brought to both committees for consideration and knowledge.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Director McLean?
Yes. Director McLean, you're recognized.
Yeah, Chair Williams, first off, great suggestion to make sure these are intertwined between the operations and the financial. And great discussion on the buses, and thanks, Gil, for mentioning that. I have two questions. One for Cindy, and I'll start with Cindy because she may be still on the mic. Cindy, of course, this has got to be reapproached with the overall board. My question to you is, how's our budget look to support $750,000 for next year?
Well, I think what we're doing right now is identifying how, in FY21, we can better position ourselves to have some of these matches that are required for grants that we have already received, not just those that we intend to apply for, but also those that, like this one, which is one of the more substantial grants that we have that requires a match. Similarly to the one that we brought to committee last month, the $3.5 million FDOT grant for the HM building, again, requiring a 50% $3.5 million local match. So going into FY21, it's going to be incumbent on us to include those types of matches in our budgets, both operating and capital, that will reallocate some of our ad valorem to those types of requirements while we can capitalize on using the CARES Act to help us be whole in our operating budget.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. And I'll just make a political plug here. I fully believe, as a board member, we need to relook at the ad valorem and the percentages on it, but I'll leave that right there. Hey, Scott, the question I had for you, it gets back to the carbon footprint slide. Is that a slide that's required by anyone outside of HART?
No, no, that's not required.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions at this time? Mr. Drainfield, I do have a couple of questions and just wanted to, first and foremost, thank you for the overview. I've been looking forward to hearing your presentation on maintenance, and I believe it's very timely considering where we are. Two-part question. When you mentioned we struggle to meet fleet, and then the other two-part question I have is, you made a reference to 74 buses that are beyond its capacity. And so tell me more about what that statement means. The first one where we struggle to meet fleet, and then secondarily, what is our contingency plan in the event there's an immediate need? 74 that are out of life cycle. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, there's actually 80 buses that have met their useful life. So first question, the 2009-2010, due to having excessive amount of miles and the continuous stop-and-go duty cycles, they have a Generation 1 or 2007 EPA emissions requirements that wasn't really a proven technology. EPA put that out, and the manufacturers were trying to race to keep that up. Then in early 2010, they introduced the diesel exhaust for a much better proven technology. But when we spec'd out the 10s, we had the 2007's emissions. So when you look at the road calls, the 2009-2010 contributes to many of the road calls because of the EPA emissions requirements we put on those fleets. And then your second question?
My second question, when you talked about 80 buses out of cycle, or met its life cycle, what is our contingency plan? It seems significant, and when you look at the total number of buses that we have, and 80 are out of cycle, so is there a plan in the event, I would hate for that to happen, but as a board, we have to think forward and say, okay, well, what happens in the event there is an issue or a concern? 80 seems to be significant, and maybe I'll just add another third part of the question in regards to if they're out of life cycle. I tried to do the correlation to see, well, how much are we spending from a mechanical standpoint to service those buses? Is there any type of crossover at some point that says, okay, it makes sense for us to purchase new buses when we're spending a certain dollar amount on buses that are out of life cycle?
And that's exactly correct. So because of the deferred maintenance over years and years, and not having midlife overhaul programs in place, the parts budget just keep going up. And, I have managed fleets with average age of 17, 18 years, and you're going to pay no matter what, either the short term or the long term.
Okay, and so is that part of our plan? Our plan is our strategy to go after getting additional funding and the matches that were spoke to earlier. Is there anything else outside of that plan that we need to work toward? You have recommendations for us. You provided outstanding information, but it was a significant call out from my standpoint. The number of buses and the opportunities we have. If there were, like the longer routes, shorter routes, how often do we utilize them? Or do we have backup plans that will allow us to extend the use until we have additional support?
Well, the only thing we can do is we streamlined our schedule maintenance and really streamlined a lot of what we do here in maintenance to try to extend that life. But other than funding, it's really tough to keep these buses going. We have other things working against us. So we're understaffed, underfunded. We put a tremendous amount of miles on a bus. So there's really no silver lining. But I can tell you what, the silver lining is out of the 40 fleet technicians, 31 are master class, and they pretty good with diagnosing the issues that we have for having the fleet so long. So that is the silver lining, but understaffed and underfunded is what's keeping us back.
All right. Unfortunately, but thank you. I appreciate your honesty. We've got work to do in this area, and more conversation needs to take place on other than funding. If it's not the funding, then are there other things we can do internally in regards to our schedule and in regards to use of the buses and locations and so forth to make sure we meet the greatest need of our patrons?
And that would be, I think, more of a service planning question, not a maintenance question.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Drainville. Are there any other questions at this time?
Commissioner Kemp.
Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Director Williams, I think, for bringing up the big question. Overall, when half of our fleet is said to have out of its useful life, basically, it's extremely important that we're paying attention to this and that we do have a plan, and it's not just grants. I wanted to put in there about the 10 buses we were going to receive, or should. I mean, I can't even imagine us not matching it with $750,000 with this great need. I've recently been told by HART staff that we can't we're not fit to run operations because of our bus fleet of the useful life having been exceeded, and that it is we were talking about doing RFPs and privatizing because of the condition of our bus fleet. And I think not only do we have to have the plan for these 10 buses, but obviously we need to have a plan to have our bus fleet not just repair and useful life, and those are great points that you brought up. We have to think about all of that in the length of the trips we're doing or whatever we need to do. But I think we also need to have a plan, no matter what, to look at how we can move ahead. And it wouldn't even be good enough to buy 10 buses a year if we have 80 outside their useful life already. I mean, we really have to be thinking about how we buy 20 or 30 a year for the next several years, or what we do. I think it's extremely important. Again, I've said before that our operations center is in critical condition from all I've heard, and to me it's the biggest regional need for transit in this whole area, and should be highlighted. But now we find out, and I've been on the board for 3.5 years, and I have never had, so I do appreciate getting this information. I think it's extraordinarily important for us to have this information. But I do think we do need to have a plan for how we can move forward to replace 20 buses next year, or in the coming years. Each year, at least 20 buses only starts to get us, partially near, and not even including the sales tax money, or if it does include the sales, I'm not sure what we do here, but this is something we need to really think about and consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Danielle, are there anyone else for questions at this time?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Well, clearly, Mr. Drainfield, this was a topic that was warranted a lot of discussion and very necessary. So there's a number of things that we have to do as a follow-up in this discussion. But the other thing is we want to thank you for bringing it forward, as well as the safety and security update. Colin did a great job there as well. Thank you for that insight, but it just requires to get some more work done, and we'll take that forward. We'll move on to the next agenda item, the committee action item. And the presentation in support of the committee action item is Chris Cochran, Director of Service Development, and he'll present on service reduction and modification.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Good afternoon, committee. Chris Cochran, Director of Service Development. Can everyone hear me okay? Just want to double check. Okay. This morning we have a presentation and ultimately an action item. Our next slide, please, Danielle. Our action item that we are bringing forth to you today is to authorize HART staff to conduct a public outreach for proposed January 2021 service changes and advance this item to the full HART Board of Directors meeting for the July 20th, 2020 meeting. Next slide, please. So I'll give you a background on how we looked at the service analysis, the objectives, give you an overview of our pre-COVID ridership and existing COVID ridership analysis that went into this plan, an overview of the modification plan, as well as the next steps. Next slide, please. So as we go into the background here, looking at the staff objectives...
A participant has joined the meeting.
Looking at the staff objectives, I want to make it very clear here that what we've looked at is evaluating the system at a holistic level and really in order to be not only fiscally responsible under our current budget needs, but balancing our desire to serve the needs of the community in an effective and an efficient manner as well. And in doing that, we've identified operational savings to maintain that fiscal responsibility, and I think that's important to understand. That is also in the context of the uncertain distribution of the future surtax funding, and of course preserving as much service coverage and frequency as possible, and this was done through a very careful analysis that we'll go over as well, maximizing existing resources in our most productive corridors that helps us preserve the frequency and maximize the ridership for the most amount of people in doing this plan, and then looking at maintaining the essential services that we were able to identify out of during this COVID-19 time, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And in addition, this is also an opportunity for us to address a lot of the community feedback that we've received since Mission Max, and being able to evaluate and put back some of the services that we feel fit well into the needs now, and what the people are saying, and ultimately, as in line with the action item today, is to listen to the needs of the customer and the community, go out, do our public outreach, do our due diligence, and ultimately hone this plan. Next slide, please. So if we look at the pre-COVID ridership, the next 4 slides will give you a good idea of the analysis that we looked at. From year to date through February, this was the pre-COVID productivity using the ridership, and what we used for the productivity in this was the passengers per revenue hour, and as you can see, it's Route 1, Route 38, 400, 42, 6. These are the main routes that we see on a monthly basis, our highest ridership, highest used routes. Really no big surprise here. The next slide, please. Also, what we looked at, can you go back one? Also, what we looked at was the bottom 10 as well, to be able to make an equivalent comparison between pre-COVID and existing COVID routes to see if we've seen any significant changes in any of these routes really bumping up that would help us identify any change that might be needed to be evaluated, in identifying essential routes that we might want to look at how we can perhaps combine, modify, and go into developing our plan. So the next two slides, next slide, please. These next two slides we used, and I think it's important to understand we do have a relatively limited amount of data. Obviously, that this the COVID ridership impact came on very quickly. It's still relatively new. Every day we're continuing to monitor and learn more about the impacts. But what we were able to look at between April 1 and April 20th did tell a big and significant story. And I think probably the biggest story out of this is that the top 5 routes, the 400, 1, 42, 6, and 12, were also
has left the meeting.
Were also routes that were existing in the highest ridership in the pre-COVID period of time as well. And what this tells us is that these are the most essential routes in our system. And it's important for us in this analysis and as we move forward in developing a final service recommendations that these are the critical routes that we kind of build the foundation upon. If you go to the next slide, please. What we did end up seeing in that same April 1 to April 20th time frame was that the low-performing routes performed essentially even lower than COVID. They certainly didn't really go any higher, and it's essentially the same routes that we saw pre-COVID, and that will also be taken into consideration as you'll see in how we develop our plan moving forward. Next slide, please. So looking at our modifications plan, the summary of our service changes really fell into 4 categories. We had some minor route adjustments. We had substantive modifications, reduced frequencies, and ultimately some removal of service. But I do want to note that removal of service wherever we could, we partially merged into existing routes, or simply just partially replaced the route to do our best to preserve as much coverage as possible, while making while being able to cut and make some financial cuts in those routes where it made sense as well. Next slide, please. And we'll go over each one of these categories here. So as we begin looking into the adjusted and added services, these are the 8 routes that we looked at for adjusting and added services. You'll see that they are spread out throughout the county. So we did take a holistic look at the services throughout the county and try to spread out our adjustment of services in all 4 of the categories that were previously shown to be able to meet the goals in making changes that benefited our riders the most while meeting the needs of next year's budgets as well. And we'll go. Let me go down each one of these changes briefly and give you an overview on them as well. Next slide, please. So for the Route 5, ultimately the Route 5 will serve the U.S. Our proposal is to bring the Route 5 back onto the USF campus, and the Route 48 to serve the USF campus as well, and be extended to serve the areas north on Fletcher. This brings back some of the pre-Mission Max service in this area, and has been something that we have heard some feedback from customers previously. Next slide, please. Adjustments to the Route 7 we are proposing to between West Shore and downtown Marion Transit Center to move it to Main Street, where it will be able to serve the future West River redevelopment, and move it from North Boulevard to Armenia Avenue, where in looking at the amount of people that we can serve on Armenia Avenue, it definitely has the opportunity to make a much more dramatic impact on the number of people that it can serve on Armenia Avenue. North Boulevard does have a large cemetery and a big swath of that north-south corridor between ML King Boulevard, and that really loses a lot of opportunity for service to be able to get to more people. Ultimately, with the West River redevelopment area, we feel it's very, very important to be able to provide some more service with the Route 7 to that mixed-use development that will be coming online soon on Main Street for that route. Next route, please, or next slide. The Route 8, Route 8 will serve 4th Avenue instead of 7th Avenue to formalize a constant detour that we are experiencing on a regular basis. We are needing to get off of Route 7 for various reasons, whether it be events and keeping it on on 4th Avenue will just be much more consistent for our riders and still providing them with a very an easy walk to 7th Avenue for workers there. Also, Route 8 would look to go down a little bit further south into the downtown area to serve Kennedy and Jackson and bypass the existing Water Street construction. Next slide, please. The Route 10, currently what we're looking to do here is adjusting and we'll talk about the Route 60 and the 275 later, but replacing the existing 60 and 275 between downtown and the airport with with service on Cypress Avenue, and essentially bringing back the Route 10 on that corridor, and we see a great deal of potential. There's obviously been a lot of development on Cypress recently, and that will continue to grow, especially with the Midtown development. This gives an opportunity to hit that Midtown development at Dale Mabry and Cypress. So we feel very strongly that this would be a very good modification for this plan. Moreover, I think it's important that we see a detour on both the 60 and the 275 onto Cypress Avenue when there is heavy traffic on 275. So this is another case where very frequent detours bring this to Cypress Avenue anyway. So it's sort of a win-win situation to not only bring service to an area that needs it now and addressing an issue where it's detouring there on a regular basis anyway. Next slide, please. The next slide addresses the Route 42 and 45, and this runs between West Shore and UATC. Our proposal is to this used to be an interline loop where it would go into Yukon Center. It does now. Our proposal is to take it out of Yukon, make the Route 45 its own route all the way to UATC, so it's a simple one-seat ride all the way there, and make the Route 42 essentially a looper service up in the university area to provide good circulation between Bears Avenue and UATC. This is something that we've actually have proposed and looked into for a while now, and this would be a great opportunity to be able to implement this. Next slide, please. So as we move into the reduced frequency, we have 7 routes that we would be looking at reducing the frequency. Now, while these are core routes, in order to address the budget side of this, while all of these do, these have a significant impact on being able to do that while still in what we feel is still providing very good frequency for people. The 1, 6, 34, 400, these are very good, very highly used routes, and only reducing them by 5 minutes, from 15 minutes to 20. We're also looking at the 33 and the 46 to be able to reduce them from 30 minutes to 60 minutes, and then reducing some trips on the express route from Fishhawk to South Tampa. Excuse me, next slide, please. Now, removal of service, we have a number of proposed routes that we are proposing for actual removal. We can start with for the most part, the express routes we are looking to either fully remove or do some type of merging so that we can run them more efficiently. And we can go through these here as we move to the next slide. Start with the 25LX and 60LX. The slide that you see on the right is the current 360. What we do not have yet is we haven't completely worked out the routing of how the 360 might be able to pick up some of what we would lose in taking away the 60LX out in the Brandon area. And our expectation is that some of the early results of the current network evaluation will help us to be able to determine that. So that's something that is an ongoing effort. We would be looking to increase peak frequency to compensate for some of the loss of service there. With the combination of combining those with the 360. Next, please. The Route 35, previous to Mission Max, the Route 30 ran all the way to Northwest Transit Center, and during Mission Max, it got split up at the airport, and between the airport and Northwest Transit Center, it became a Route 35, and the Route 30 turned around at the airport. And we have seen a dramatic impact on ridership, in particular in the Route 35. Our proposal is to put that back together and make it a one-seat ride between Northwest Transit Center and downtown. We also, it would make, for the operators, it would be a lot better to have the end of the line at the Northwest Transit Center, as it's been proven difficult for the drivers to be able to actually use some of the facilities at the airport. With that at the end of the line, just because it's a little far to get to the facility, so for that particular reason, it was not as beneficial as we'd like. But we definitely would like to see. Definitely are very confident that bringing this back as one single seat ride will have a significant impact on ridership for the Route 30 and being able to bring it back to how it was. Next slide, please. The Route 275LX, currently this runs from Wiregrass across the Pasco County line all the way to the airport through Marion Transit Center. Our proposal is to end this at UATC. And continue it running across the Pasco County line from Wesley Chapel to UATC. In this segment alone, we do see about 55% of all the total ridership just in this segment alone. So not only are we preserving the ridership in there, we have fantastic facilities in terms of what DOT has provided in that corridor for bus bays, for people to be able to access the buses, so our proposal is to end the 27, turn it into the 22LX, end it at UATC, and we still, with the 45 and some other route opportunities, people still have opportunities to get downtown. Next slide, please. As far as HART Flex, we are proposing to remove HART Flex services. What we are looking to do for the Northdale Flex is, instead of running an actual Flex service, we would maintain the fixed route portion of that Flex, which runs up to the Van Dyke St. Joseph's Hospital area, and do a loop around Calusa Trace up there. There is we found that there is enough slack time in that route to be able to make that loop up there and bring it back, and that would essentially be a revenue neutral opportunity. So we do not lose that coverage, but we are able to do that on a fixed route service, but not on a flex basis. Next slide, please. So we are proposing to eliminate the remainder of the flex routes in the system as well. And essentially, this would be our modification plan. What you are looking at, what's important here, what you are looking at is the colors you see are proposed frequencies. So the green lines would be 20-minute frequency, blue 30-minute, purple 60-minute, and there's still some to be determined. And I think it's important to note here, ongoing, we are beginning to get some early recommendations and preliminary information and data that we are able to work into this plan from the network evaluation, and that will continue to be something that we will be able to do. Next slide, please. Ultimately, the impact, this reduces peak vehicles to a need for about 115 peak vehicles, and a total reduction of about 10% of our annual vehicle hours. On a annual basis, our estimated savings would be in the range of $4.3 million, being that we would look to start this in the second quarter of fiscal year 21. We would only be looking at projected savings of little over 3.2 million savings in fiscal year 21. But beyond that, we would see the 4.3 on an annual basis. I think it's important to note 2 million annually would be directly related to operator savings, and us being able to adjust roster hours. Next slide, please. And then ultimately the highlights of this plan that we'd like to reiterate, again, our goal is really to maintain as much service as possible in being able to reduce any dramatic impacts on the community. We've feel comfortable in having been able to identify areas where we can increase coverage in the Cypress and West River areas, North Florida and Bears on the Route 48. That brings back service at the Bears and Florida area around the Walmart up there. That is probably one of the most outspoken communities up there that were very outspoken about loss of service during Mission Max up there. It will also provide all-day service between Bears and Fletcher up there, where the 20X was not able to. And looking at routes with bus stops, with the bus stops that are impacted, it's relatively minimal in the grand scheme of things here. What you see is the route in parentheses is the total number of routes. Pardon me. In parentheses, next to the route number is the total number of bus stops that are impacted. We have really been able to minimize the percentage of total ridership that is impacted with these bus stops that would be impacted by these routes, and there are a handful of them that are still served by other routes. So it's not as though they're completely going away. People will just have to connect to the system in another way. With that speaks to the third bullet point, where for the most part, impacted stops can still be served with fixed route service within a quarter mile. Next slide, please. So our draft schedule at this point in time is we're presenting to you right now in June based on our presentation to the HART Board and potential approval. We would carry out public outreach through the end of September. We would have a public meeting in October. We would bring back the results in November to the board, at which point in time, based on the direction of the board at that point in time, we would be able to move forward with rostering and getting this out for a January 3rd implementation, likely, for this service. Next slide, please. Our next steps, we will continue as you all know, our network evaluation is ongoing. We are incorporating recommendations from that COA. As we speak, we will continue to get more information. We're expecting to come out of it in late June 2020 that will continue to go into being able to bring it out to the public and vet it with the public. Any additional changes that we have, we would be able to bring forward to you all at the next board meeting as well. Internal input is ongoing. This has been a all hands-on effort. Communications, operations, finance, everybody's involved in this. We'll continue to modify this plan based on the high-level policy direction that we get as well in meetings such as today and the board, and of course, probably most important, incorporating the feedback from the public outreach between July and September, and being able to really hone this plan and bring back a final product to you in November for approval. Next slide. I believe that's it. Again, the action item we have requested is to authorize the HART staff to conduct this public outreach for these proposed changes in January 2021, and advance this item to the full HART Board of Directors at the July 20th, 2020 regular board meeting. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Danielle, are there any comments or questions by the committee members? Hands raised.
Commissioner Kemp and Council Member Schisler.
Thank you. Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you. First, I would just like to say I just don't understand why it didn't come to strategic planning. If this isn't strategic planning, I'm not sure what is. And to have put this on this agenda. Also, I tried to look at this ahead of time, and until now, I wasn't able to see anything or see what it was that was going to be presented. And so this is a first view of what was out there. And I also had a projection, or I had it worked out by the finance staff, I'd just like to say I wanted to have cost per route, which was sent to me, that I intended to have put forward with different information for the strategic planning committee to look at. And some things were very relevant, like the cost per passenger trip that we've been doing for the South County shopper was about $120 per passenger per trip. And costs for kind of the regional trips, a lot of them were in $20 to $30 range, whereas you have Route 1, the Florida Avenue and Nebraska Avenue, was more in the $5.50 per trip. And I'm not even sure that that included revenue that was put forward for, by passenger revenue was included in that. But I'd just like to bring that to your attention. That hasn't been on here. There's a few things I like about this, and many things that I find very disturbing about this whole plan. And I don't even almost know, because it was presented with this huge amount, first, of information all at once that you didn't get to look at before. But first off, calling to, we were talking about conducting public outreach, and I know this is going to be done with the Tyndale Oliver COA. And Tyndale Oliver did the Mission Max, and I'll say that the outreach for that was, and that wasn't during coronavirus times, they had 3 outreach meetings. I was the only board person that went to them at 3 different libraries. They were attended by a handful of people who I went and talked to. Several people just happened to be it was 2 libraries and a center in McFarland Park Center, who just happened to be at the library and hadn't even intentionally come to that. It was very poorly advertised with very little input. So I'm concerned, and I'm more concerned about in coronavirus times what kind of input we expect from this. The other is the extreme cutting that goes into this with de minimis savings, as far as I can tell. Are these cuts, is this, Chris, supposed to be for coronavirus, or is this, we're talking about this would have happened without coronavirus, and what happens if, for instance, a vaccine is created in January? Can you just tell me, first of all, are these cuts, these are supposed to be permanent, full-on cuts for the future?
Yes, Commissioner. So these are recommendations with the expectations, regardless of COVID, outside of COVID, based on our not receiving the transit surtax.
But we were doing these routes before there was a transit surtax. So while I have very much supported doing efficient and good service, these were services that we have been offering, and all of a sudden we're not only going to cut all kinds of service here, we are going to cut frequency for very high routes, and like our highest routes, the 1, the 6, the 34. I just think 15 minutes to do frequency of 15 minutes is sad compared to any transit agency of any major city in the country. I think don't go by 20-minute routes, and that we would have a 20-minute route standard, I think is kind of shocking. Instead of moving in the right direction, moving in the wrong direction. Why we wouldn't? I can understand maybe during coronavirus times, but certainly not in these times. And the cuts made everywhere are so extreme that I really don't understand. A couple of other things, just specifically. There was the Route 8, I guess, that is the streetcar. Or the Route 8, can you show that again? It looks like it parallels a streetcar a lot.
Yes, that'd be up on 4th Avenue.
Right. You could get the same way. You could get from there to there on the streetcar, correct?
Yes, ma'am, but you can't get there you can't get to MTC without going through Ybor from where the 8 is coming from.
Right. It seems to me that when we have such incredible needs, why we would be duplicating basically the streetcar service, and we've talked about a circulator downtown. So I just don't. It just doesn't seem like a good plan to me. I should say, very pleased. I know that the 275 is run on Cypress a lot because it can't run on the interstate because the interstate has too much traffic, and Cypress, I've always said, is a sensible place, and especially with all the new development. So I am happy about finally getting that Cypress route back that was there before. We had lots of issues about that. But to me, this looks like when we're really cutting and doing these extreme cutting, for us to duplicate the streetcar service in essence, and I do, I very much support HART doing a circulator, like Limo has done in downtown Orlando. In fact, they have like 4 of them basically in each direction, and we have 0. And if there's any place we're going to put a circulator with HART's name on it, and a HART circulator, it should be downtown. Our branding, our service, that should be our place. But I'm extraordinarily concerned about this extreme loss of service in so many ways, and I think it really needs more attention. I'm extremely concerned that we would degrade our HART existing services in frequency from 15 to 20 minutes. To me, that's like that's extreme. That is very extreme, because where we should be moving is the other direction, 15 to 10 minutes, like the rest of the world has in terms of frequency. That's very concerning. And to put the Brandon route from a half hour to an hour is also extremely concerning. I'd like to see the numbers, but I also think to talk about this, I think we do a coronavirus plan, I'm okay with for a time, but to say that this is our permanent plan that we have, it cuts $4 million, and it is, I'm just kind of shocked by the scope of it, and I'll say that in non-coronavirus times, I was very unhappy by the public outreach that was done, and I can't imagine it could be better in these times. And people frequently don't realize although it's shown all over the nation, that they don't know, that they don't understand quite what frequency cuts mean. And I know that when we had TransPro doing our voice of the customer a few years ago, we were told frequency doesn't matter, when the rest of the nation was doing everything they could to increase their frequencies. And so I just look at this as a real dereliction of our service, and I think it's a really extreme proposal, and I think we really have to consider it more. And I'm also wondering why it wasn't brought to strategic planning. This just would seem like the place for it. If anything is to be put there, this would seem like the what you would want to put forward. The committee to put that in.
If I can chime in, I do hope you notice that every single slide has draft on it. This is a working document. November is a long way away. Tyndale Oliver is actually not involved in the outreach on this. We have another contractor that will be involved in this.
What's the name of that contractor again?
Valerian.
So they were the same ones that did the Mission Max outreach, right?
I was not here for Mission Max, Commissioner, so I apologize. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I think that, yeah.
But very sensitive to understanding your concerns, and we look forward to working with. There is a slide in there that points out it's critical for us to work hand in hand with at a high policy level, as well as listening to what the people need, and we certainly look forward to working with yourself and other board members and the public to be able to hone this to the best plan that it can be. We're not looking to take service away from people if we have to. There's some tough decisions that need to be made, and I'm just going to leave it at that at this point. And very much respect your comments, and I appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Committee Chair Williams, I have Jackie Haldo.
Yeah, I'm just extremely... excuse me?
I was going to say I have Jackie Haldo on the line who can address some of the outreach.
This is Jackie Haldo, Chief of Communications and Marketing for the record. And I just wanted to say that, Commissioner Kemp, we echo and fully support your comments. I think from an industry and having done this for almost 15 years, communicating service changes to the public, I think one of the biggest detriments is not being fully transparent. So what this outreach looks like to, I would say, to our team as well as operations and planning, we believe will be wholesale different from what you saw last time, because the worst place staff can put a board is having customers coming post the decision. So we would want to make that outreach as extensive and as transparent as possible. So we are going to work to enhance efforts even within the confines. So we realize we have a task in front of us, but wanted you to know it was at top of mind.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if I was still on or not. Thank you for that. I appreciate all the feedback. I still don't understand why this wasn't brought to the Strategic Planning Committee. I'll just say not this, what is. But I'm very concerned about the outreach that will be done. I'm very concerned that this dramatic, extreme plan is being put forth, and I don't know that it merits, in terms of the budget, budget that will be put forth. And also, if we're not using our budget, our CARES Act, to make sure that we give good service, at least part of it. I understand, and I've been very concerned about the budget as it moved forward, in that it was there was no reserves in it, and I've been outspoken about that. But this is again a de minimis in terms of the whole budget savings, and I think we really have to think about how not to cut frequency on any of those routes and look at some of the other services here. It's a big deterioration of HART's services and brand and product.
Commissioner Kemp, duly noted. Thank you. Councilmember Schisler?
Sorry about that. Yes, thank you, Ms. Williams. A couple of comments and then a couple of questions. Chris, good presentation. A lot of work goes into it, and I recognize that it's still very much a draft document. Thank you for bringing it forward. I believe it's timely to get started on this. I think that the overall reduction in ridership that I believe HART's experienced over the recent times probably brings us into a bigger limelight, considering the budgetary restraints and constraints that we have and probably will have going forward, depending upon what happens in the courts with sales tax. I do have a comment. It appears that there's a lot of good planning that's going into this, particularly with the Cypress Avenue and some of the construction that's going on in the north part of the county. It looks like some efforts were made to accommodate that to potentially increase the ridership and at least offer proper services and servicing in those new areas. So that is very, very good. I do have three quick questions. Number one, at the last board meeting, there was commentary regarding route number 39, increasing the frequency from 30 minutes, I think it was 30 minutes to 15 minutes. That didn't seem to be apparent here. Has that gone into effect already? Chris?
No, sir.
When will that, I didn't see that in this list unless I missed it. When will that be going into effect specifically?
Well, at the moment, we have a lot that we're evaluating in terms of, how we begin as ridership begins to come back, how we are able to where and how we are able to bring back the appropriate level of services throughout the county. We're having a great deal of challenges with having enough drivers to be able to fill the seats to.
Fair comment. That was more curiosity than anything else. Okay. Talk about Route 30. How long is Route 30 going to end up being? Going way up into the northwest area and then all the way over to Marion Transit Center. How long is that going to be in terms of the single cycle of a route?
When I got here, it had been split, but I would, prior to my being here, I believe it was a 60-minute route. A 60-minute trip up there in that range. It may have been at 30-minute frequency, but I don't imagine it, at peak times in the morning, it could be a little more difficult because the challenge during peak times is that Memorial Highway interchange to get to the airport.
In the potential savings area you were talking about, you commented, or the comment was about $2 million I guess salaries. I can't remember exactly what the slide said, but that $2 million. How will that affect employee headcount? Will it be a reduction outright? Would it be attrition, or how will that savings be manifested?
Right now, as we see it, it is simply a reduction as we see it in not FTEs, but that we're counting, but as roster hours. Right now, we have roster hours at around 44 and a half average rosters, and we would set a goal for a little bit lower than that.
Okay, so it'll come back more into line with 40-hour work week.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're fully prepared to get into details on the FTE.
Will we need to go back to the union for any of that?
I will leave that to ops to comment. I'm not. I have a solid round understanding of the contract, but I don't want to misstate anything.
Okay, that's fair. All right, I'm done. Thank you.
Councilmember Schuessler. Is there any other hand raised at this time, Danielle?
Yes, ma'am. Director Harden.
Director Harden, yes. You recognize?
Thank you. Good first effort here, Chris. And I look forward as we, move forward to analyzing this closer. I'd like to echo a few things that were said. I think that, as we do move forward, information that would be helpful to me would be probably the rest of the board would be looking really at the cost per route, so that rather than savings that was based on a blended average. Additionally, it strikes me that the there's two parallel paths here. One, of course, is with the, if the virus continues and service needs are lower because of that, that's a consideration. But additionally, assuming that the tax does come forward or that it doesn't, this is an opportunity really to look at, all the inefficiencies. And I think, one of the hard questions that I hope you're all asking internally, and that will be additional information that will be provided, will be, the potential G&A savings that will mirror the service cuts. So obviously, if we're saying, cutting X amount of service, if that does become permanent in a situation where we don't have the additional tax and we just need to be a leaner agency, we really need to look at what portion of the fixed costs, where identify where potential savings are. So hopefully that'll be a part of what is brought forward to the board as well. With regards to the specifics of what we saw today here, I do think, I believe that y'all have put out the RFP for the downtown circulators, so it would be interesting if y'all took a really close look at how these routes that loop through downtown overlap that potential service as duplicate, whether there's any duplication there or savings that can be made by assuming the circulators are the better service that we can provide and modifying those overlapping routes. I think and I'd like to echo Commissioner Kemp's concern with the 20-minute reduction. I mean, on some of the routes, I think that you've seen increased ridership, like I want to say Route 1 on Florida Avenue, and that those may be areas where we would want to see service actually increased or certainly maintained at the 15 minutes, and that might mean that we need to cut or reduce something else. But it seems like that you've identified a lot of low-hanging fruit, and I think part of this process is assuming that the tax does get upheld and we move forward is one of kind of pruning and cleaning up of the budget so that we're ready, lean and mean, and ready to move forward, adding new service and new types of premium transit and that type thing if and when that happens. Anyway, thank you, and I look forward to y'all refining this and also seeing that additional information about the per route costs in more detail, and the which as I look at this with these express routes and some of these longer route cuts, I think that you're looking at that data, and I think we're going to see some of what Commissioner Kemp was concerned with, that super expensive routes that are not effective use of public money being cut here. But I think it'll be helpful for us to see that those per route costs. And then again, to see staff's take on, what proportion of G&A, savings are potential, that you can identify that would track with, this leaner, meaner schedule. So anyway, thank you, sir, and we'll look forward to seeing this as you develop it.
Yes, sir. If I can comment, just real quick, on the last 2 pages of the status ridership and productivity report that you will find, this started a few months ago. We started putting in cost per passenger by route. It's also separated out by frequency. So I just would like to make sure that you are all aware that that's in there. I will absolutely make sure that cost per route is included as well as part of this report if it's not moving forward. But I do know that cost per passenger is included by route.
Thank you. Director McCann.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. Could you all hear me?
I got it. Turn it off.
Yes.
Could you all hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Chairman. This discussion is sort of reminiscent of the last discussion we had about how we're going to replace the aging fleet of buses. And it just strikes me, I think the report, the the tentative recommendations seem to be very well thought out and very comprehensive. But I feel as a board member, I'm looking at all this stuff incrementally. I'm not looking at it in the context of the budget. I think we can't have a conversation about reductions and efficiencies without understanding how that is going to impact the budget and whether or not there are other priorities that we're not looking at the moment. I really feel as if when we look at these things as a single agenda item, we're not looking at this thing from a priority standpoint. And I'm not saying anybody is recommending something that's not appropriate. I'm just saying we're not getting the big picture, and I really feel like we need to merge these discussions together in order for us to understand what's happening and make informed decisions.
Director Mechanic, thank you for your feedback. Danielle, is there anyone else?
Yes, ma'am. Director Knight is on the line and has a comment.
Thank you. Director Knight, you are recognized.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. I just had some concerns. I wanted, with the North Boulevard switching to Armenia. Also, I agree with Director Kemp. We have oversight committees, and it should go through the strategic, just like the auditing and financing and things that pertains to that. Why aren't we going through before it gets there? We really shouldn't even be discussing this now. If the strategic committee hadn't listened and looked at it and everything, then bring it to the full board. So we need to go back. I don't know who's making these decisions that we're not, like you're just not looking at the committees. That's what should happen first. Then I have a lot of other questions, but I don't feel it's time now for it. Let's hear from the committee that's supposed to be addressing this.
Thank you, Director Knight. Danielle, I'm not sure if this request goes directly to you, but Commissioner Kemp mentioned the same thing. So is there any, we can take this action item for operations, what belongs to operations and what belongs to the strategic committee, so that we could identify, some type of order and clarify the questions or comments that have come up recently, just to make sure we're all aligned on where they go or they don't. I don't have an opinion on either way. I'd like to understand the dynamics of the committees, please, and the roles and responsibilities.
Yes, ma'am. So the roles and responsibilities are actually included in every committee packet. We've done that since the beginning of the year. And the reason why this one was brought to the operations is, it's going out for public outreach. It's changing the current routes as they are and like that. So this committee action item is going to we have it scheduled going to the July meeting. So it is reasonable to have it for this committee.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mrs. Williams. May I speak? This is Carolyn Stewart.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
You're recognized, Ms. Stewart.
One, I have several things, but first of all, Cindy will bring the budget for the July board meeting, and so that the budget will be presented, but we thought that we would present this with you so you would have this, so that this would not have to take up time at the budget meeting, and it falls in together. Also, under the Operations and Safety Committee, number E, this committee reviews and makes recommendations to the full boards on route and service standards and productivity, and also it reviews and recommends adjustments to fare and service structure, and therefore we felt this is part of our service structure, and it also deals with our routes. I wanted to also address the question related to would there be any reduction in employee workforce, And based upon this model, it would not, this draft, it would not, workforce reductions will be based upon our current trends related to attrition. We're not going to have any new classes, so we don't have to hire people that we will eventually have to let go. And any reduction in the workforce would have to go, of course, through the union, and the policy states that if any employee is ripped or furloughed through this process, then that person would be eligible to be rehired. And so as it stands now, if we look at the question came up about the time spent in overtime or the money spent in overtime, we're still working toward to keep that 40-hour model. Just for numbers, in January, we spent $397,000 in overtime. In February, $322,000 overtime. In March, $295,000 in overtime. And as we made our adjustments to hours worked, so that the employees could stay worked, in April it was $20,856, and for May we only spent $556 in overtime. So if we continue the current trend of monitoring the efficiency of the routes and the hours, we would be able to at least meet the metric of not having to reduce our full-time employee workforce on the operations side, and also to meet the numbers that we project to save in cost in some of the cost savings here. And so I just want to say that.
Thank you, Ms. House-Stewart. I think the call out, and I'll try to recap this, is to understand the decisions that we're making and how they align to the budget, and we're looking at them separately, and so how do they correlate or correspond? And so if there's a way to bring those together, I think that's what's been said on several occasions of how do we make decisions and not make them unilateral, and then not understanding what the other priorities and impact is to the budget.
And that will be brought out in the budget presentation.
Okay. Thank you. I believe I saw...
This is Kimberly Overman. I'd like to ask a question and comment on that. I'm sorry for attending late. I had another commitment this morning that could not be moved. May I be recognized?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. I came in on the tail end of the presentation, however, I had seen it. And I think what I'm hearing from a variety of the directors is that while this particular presentation to this particular committee is addressing issues associated with operation safety and the impact it would have on our finances, the issue that I think folks are challenged with is the question I was going to ask, which is, these recommended changes that we are recommending in order to address our financial constraints as well as ridership needs is maybe missing the mark that I'm concerned about as a policy and as a board member for the mission of HART in providing transit service for those individuals within our community that need to use transit and want to use transit. So the question I have for the presentation that we've seen on the adjustments that are being recommended for consideration does not show me what the impact is of these changes as it pertains to transit-dependent communities. So, for example, we've made a variety of recommended changes that fit our budget, but they may not necessarily address the impact to those communities in Hillsborough County that are transit-dependent communities. So, for example, the HART Flex may not have as great a ridership because businesses and the jobs there haven't fully been developed as South County has developed, but there may be a very high transit-dependent community living there. So the overlay of the impact of these changes to areas of Hillsborough County that are transit dependent, I think is an important part of this process. And I think that's what I'm hearing when people are suggesting that this needed to be addressed at strategic planning first to see if these changes are in line with our mission. and then presented from a financial perspective. So I'm not suggesting that I'm commenting on any of the changes at this point, but I think that may be the crux of the challenge we're addressing. There are a lot of changes that are recommended here, and they all relate to what it sounds like to constraints on the budget, for the most part, and constraint on manpower, and constraints on equipment. But at the end of the day, our job as a board member in general is to find ways that we provide efficient, effective transit service, not only for individuals who like to ride transit, but especially for those that need transit to be able to help their lives function. And the HART Flex service is critical to a lot of the folks in that particular area of the county. So I think to address the concerns, I would be very happy to take a look at this presentation again, where it identifies those transit-dependent areas of our county, and I know we have that data, the MPO has that data, and look at it from that lens on any recommendations we would consider. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Overman. Director Mechanic, I believe your hand was raised.
Commissioner Kemp has her hand up.
Okay. Director Mechanic, was he asking to be acknowledged? I think his hand was up before Commissioner Overman. Okay. Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank Director Knight and others who have commented because this is the heart of HART. This is the heart of our transit agency, which is the most underfunded transit agency in the nation, not by a little bit, but by a long shot, even compared to PSTA in Pinellas. Hugely underfunded. But we have to look carefully at how we're doing that and our costs and who we're serving and how. And actually, and thank you, Commissioner Overman, I mean, what other time can we know about equity is what we're hearing there. And yet, are we paying attention to that? And actually, some of the most, and I know you use the term transit dependent, but people that rely on our transit system actually aren't even somewhat the flex, but they're not much talking about that, but actually are the people that use the routes that they want to go from 15 to 20 minutes, which is just shocking to me. But Hillsborough Avenue, Florida Avenue, and these, by the way, Florida Avenue and Nebraska Avenue both go into the unincorporated as well as the downtown. Hillsborough the same way, both sides. Some of our most important routes through East Tampa, which, by the way, more transit riders than any place in the entire region. And I think we really should be looking at that, understanding it, doing a knowing and thorough review. And it's really the core of, I think, our mission and understanding. And we have to do something about the buses that we apparently don't have in good service, and think about how to strengthen our operations within our budget, not diminish them. And we do have $39 million from the CARES Act funding. I know I would also like that to be in reserves, but if it's not in reserves to help us through this time, which, you know, we I think we really need to look at what our needs are to keep the service going, and hopefully we can make that case for a tax again if need be, or whatever it is that comes forward in the future. But this is a very, very important consideration, and this isn't just coronavirus. This is looking at the future of the agency, and to have had so little information. But I appreciate those who said it should definitely go through strategic planning. I think if this doesn't go through strategic planning, this isn't just operations we have in place. This is talking about changing operations we have in place, adding and getting rid of. This is our transit overall strategic plan. And if this isn't considered, and by the way, I was told that there was nothing to put on my committee agenda of strategic planning, and to me, that's a disservice to our board to have not had that there and have the kind of overview and oversight that a huge plan like this should have an input from our board. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last hands raised on this topic for Mr. Cochran at this point?
Yes, Director Harden.
Director Harden, you're recognized.
Equal home rule power. And, to try to circumvent actually just hitting the bases and doing proper budgeting and, this agency's this thing. So, as I thought through this and discussed it with Dan and David, we call it a SSD, but it's not a dependent or independent district, right? All it is a tax. It's the city implemented a value-based tax on certain portions of property, and they hired a third-party charitable organization to spend it with autonomy, with little or no oversight. So there's like a letter form, quote, work plan, and they just send those money to the downtown partnership. There's little or no public records with regards to exactly how it's spent, and a good bit of the coin. So, the reality when they came back and said, $3.5 million this year, but since we're somewhere in the mid 60% of the budget is what I would call G&A, right? Just overhead and administration. So then so this is where they are broken and attempting to find some way to apportion this properly, that it's balanced and fair, is because they're saying, well, the 60%, 65% has to be spread over every area, and that's the lion's share of the cost. And then we can say, oh, well, but you don't want these services, but you're still paying for this limited overhead. In all reality, that has no check and balance. That has no. Our elected officials are looking at the budget of it and making decisions like, this is what we should be spending this money on. And so at the end of the day, Princeton sends a check, Harvard sends a check to the city. They say, yeah, we're tax exempt, but we realize we get all these services, we're going to pay for it. So, those are negotiations. All I'm saying is if I want to donate to UT, I'll donate to UT. They can't tax me for it on a value-based assessment. So I agree with you. Maybe y'all just are of the idea you're staying in, but the way to fix this is one of two ways to fix it. Is either I'm going to demand to be out, and then when it's your tax roll next year, you'll decide what to do. But you're still under this unlawful tax. So it's just blatantly illegal. So the way they've comported it, right? And it's allowed them to circumvent the process of creating a proper MSTU and going through the public hearing process and going through the budgeting process and going through the breaking statutory purchasing processes for the services that they determine are needed. So, and this is just going to get, it didn't really matter in 1994 when they created it. And there was, one condo project down there, right up in the corner, around the corner from me by the interstate, probably one residential thing down there for the most part. And, everybody probably agreed that it'd be nice to have some people wandering around, creating a sense of presence, a sense of activity. I was building affordable housing for the city in 91 to 94 in Tampa Heights. And, it was the height that cracked. There was a lot of vacancy, a lot of issues. But now things are different, and, as I keep telling these people, make this thing into something we need.
Director Harden?
Or leave us out. So, anyway. So,
Director Harden, can you hear us?
Divide this thing up into 3, 4, 5 districts, the Water Street District, the Heights District, core downtown, the areas on the other side of the river, and come up with individual work plans, individual, taxes, which,
Committee Committee Chair Williams, we don't believe that was for our meeting, so we went ahead and muted Director Harden.
Thank you. Thank you. At this point, do we have any other questions before we move forward with the action that seeks us to authorize to conduct the necessary public outreach related to proposed services changes in January 2021?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Carpenter, you have any additional, anything else you want to bring forward to the committee members at this time? Any discussion on the action any further than what we've had previously?
No, ma'am, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion? I'll repeat that. If we could go on next, please. Is there a motion to approve? Danielle, place them on mute for causing the problem at this point, please. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the action item to authorize HART staff to conduct public outreach for our proposed January 2021 service changes?
I believe, should we have a motion to take it to the full board? Is that the motion?
It was my understanding, and we'll need clarification, but the action was it's an outreach action to get further feedback on the recommendations and to confirm that the data that was provided today or the recommendations provided today are consistent with the public. Am I mistaken, Danielle?
Well, actually, what you're Director Schisler is correct. You guys are authorizing a recommendation to forward this action item to the full board and place on the consent agenda for the July 20th Board of Directors meeting.
Director Schisler, thank you for the correction and the confirmation, Danielle. So are we?
I'd like to make a comment.
I can't see who the user, the 10 is, Danielle.
It's, we believe it's Director Knight.
Director Knight, you're recognized.
Since the strategic committee didn't have an input in it, I think we should shoot it back to them and then bring it back, even if we need a special meeting, an emergency meeting. But I think we should continue with protocol.
I second.
Okay, so we have a change in the motion. And Danielle, would you repeat the motion that has been recommended and seconded at this time?
Yes, ma'am. The motion that Director Knight just made was that we take this committee action item to a strategic planning and external relations committee before sending a recommendation to the regular board of directors, I believe.
Adam Harden
has left the meeting.
And Commissioner and Director Kemp has seconded it.
Thank you. All right, Danielle, will you take a vote at this time, please?
I have a comment to make. I've got my hand up.
Oh, sorry about that, Commissioner Kemp. You're recognized.
Right. I just wanted to ask, Danielle, you said to put it on a consent agenda? When the original motion?
Yes, ma'am. Our practice here at HART is if there is a recommendation to approve from a committee, it goes on to a consent agenda for the regular board. If the committee does not recommend approval, then we leave it as an action item, not approved by a committee on our next board of directors agenda.
So I would just like to say for the record that me to think that this would have just been on the consent agenda and not been for the most important thing that we do, not to be for full consideration for the board, even after the strategic planning committee. This is, This is the heart of what we do, and to think that it would be placed after this committee onto a consent agenda is kind of shocking to me, and really is not, again, having the board decide the public policy of how we move forward. And this is this is the biggest decision we make. So I'm just kind of shocked by hearing you say that. But we can go. I guess if there's no other comments, I just wanted to say that before, before we move forward.
Councilmember Schisler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope we're not losing sight of what we're trying to accomplish here. We're not passing judgment on the changes. We're strictly asking for outreach to go forward. Now, I agree that it should maybe not be a consent agenda item, especially considering the fact that there is concern that it did not go through the proper committee. I don't know. My tenure here isn't long enough to know what the original intent was with the strategic planning committee. I don't know that it deals with the scheduling portions of it. So I truly do believe that it could have been it was a judgment call made by staff, whether it goes through operations, because it is an operational issue. There's no attempt on my mind to cut out anybody to make such drastic changes.
Has joined the meeting.
To make such drastic changes as to completely change our overall mission and what our overall strategic plan is. So in that light, I can understand why staff brought it the methodology that they did. I don't believe it should be a consent agenda item, although, again, I can see their logic for that. It's strictly to plan the outreach. We're not planning the cuts. So it's still draft, it's still changing, it's still morphing. So until it goes to the public, things are going to change, and it's going to be a dynamic document. So I don't see the need to kick it back and add another whole month to the whole process. I think we can move it forward. All they want to do is plan the outreach. They're not initiating the changes. With that, I'll stop.
Director Schisler, thank you for the clarification. That was my understanding, that we were asking for outreach, and that's what we were going to do, and everything else was going to be placed at that time. I understand the comments from everyone else and the concern about the order protocol here. Thank you for the comment. Commissioner Overman, you've been recognized. You're recognized. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. And I hear everyone's imaginations on this. Let's just put it that way. And while I agree that if the motion had previously been or was going to be to authorize HART to conduct public outreach, that's one thing. But the proposed service changes that have not been addressed by strategic planning is the challenge. I have been working on a lot of surveys lately, and some surveys are terrific. They ask questions to find out what would people need, and it works out very well. With a circumstance like this, the service changes are the choices without necessarily finding out the impact of changes. So if the outreach says, hi, you have answer A or B, and both answers are not great answers, but you're going to pick B because it's the least worst circumstance, that doesn't necessarily address our strategic planning goals, nor our mission. So while I'm not suggesting that's the case here, I think before we make recommendations on proposed service changes, the operational service changes, I think it's important that we recognize our planning process and our mission goals prior to going to the public and giving them a set group of answers to the question, can you live with these changes? We obviously, as a board, have to address the financial cost of whatever those answers are. But in doing outreach and doing surveying of our ridership and the community, I think it's important that we recognize that we ask the questions that are needed rather than, here are the answers, take one. And this presentation feels like, here are the answers, pick one. And so if the outreach is going to be different, great. If we need to do outreach, I'm fine with that too. But I do think it is important that Strategic Planning Committee review this prior to and take into consideration our concerns about the finances and understand what that is. We can address that here. We're supposed to. But in line with our strategic planning policies and priorities. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Commissioner Overman. So Danielle, at this time, we have a motion on the table that asks for us to go to the public for outreach, and then we had a second. And so, at this point, we have the option of voting on it or voting it down. So, are we at that point now to take a vote? But let's restate the motion.
Commissioner, Director Williams,
yes.
If I had my hand up, that wasn't the motion. The motion was to bring it to the Strategic Planning Committee. That was the motion that I seconded that that was made. Director Knight made. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, this is Carolyn House Stewart. For information, Commissioner Kemp is chairman of the Strategic Planning Committee, and every member of the Strategic Planning Committee is on this call except the mayor. She's the only other person who's a member of the Strategic Planning Committee. But Mr. Harding, Mr. McLean, Mr. Mechanic, and Mrs. Oberman are members of the Strategic Planning Committee. Director Shanahan resigned from that committee, so everybody present now is hearing the presentation as presented today, as it would be presented to the Strategic Planning Committee, except the mayor. So I just want you to know that in the interest of everybody's time, and certainly people having more time to review and ask any additional questions. But every member of that committee, with the exception of the mayor, is present today.
Thank you. And Danielle, just to make sure, thank you, Ms. House Stewart. Danielle, please read the motion over again. I want to make sure I have that accurate and what the second was and who seconded, please.
Yes, ma'am. Director Knight made a motion to take this committee action item to authorize HART staff to conduct public outreach for proposed January 2021 service changes to the Strategic Planning and External Relations Committee before making a recommendation to the full Board of Directors. And Director Kemp seconded.
No. Excuse me, I have my hand up. That is not the motion that was made by Director Knight. Please ask him to restate his motion.
Director Kemp, thank you. You're recognized, and thank you for the question. Director Knight, just for clarification, we want to make sure we have the right motion. If you will please repeat that.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My motion, before we go any further, to send it back to Strategic and Planning Committee. Let them look at it and everything and make the decision. Then we'll bring it, and they get all the information or whatever. Even though a lot at this meeting on the phone, we don't do business like that. We're just, because somebody here. We want it properly and right. I think that my motion, what I just stated, that's the motion.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second. I already seconded that motion.
Thank you. All right, Danielle, if we could go ahead and take a vote at this point based on Director Knight's motion and Commissioner Kemp's second.
Yes, ma'am, no problem. This is Danielle from HART. Please say yes or no after your name is called. Director Hardin? Director
Yes.
Kemp? Oh, thank you. Director Kemp?
Yes.
Director Knight?
Yes.
Director McLean? Director McLean? Director Mechanic? Director Mechanic? Director Overman?
Yes.
Director Schisler?
No. Do you still have a quorum?
This is Julia Mandel. I am a bit concerned. Do we have a quorum? Because
yes,
it sounds like Mr. Harden and Mr. Mechanic have dropped off.
We need 5 for a quorum, and it appears that we have 6.
Mr. Harden did respond yes, I believe.
Okay.
Yes.
You're right, said yes.
Yes, we have 8 members on the joint committee. We need 5, and it appears that we have 6. And the only vote that I'm missing is Director Williams.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4. The motion passes 5-1. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Director Harden, this concludes our agenda at this point, but I wanted the opportunity as the Chair for Finance Committee for you to have, if there are any comments from you at this point. Before we go.
No, thank you. Thanks for running the meeting. I appreciate it, and look forward to having a meeting in person soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any old business? New business?
Committee Chair, there is an information item just for your, just for the committee to review. They're included in your packet in Section 5 as an information item. This is a response to Committee Member Kemp's previous request for a report on the resiliency of the HART Operations Facility, just so the committee knows that it's in the packet.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the information item in Section 5? Okay, thank you. I'll go back to...
I'm sorry, Committee Chair, there's Director Schisler and Director Kemp both have their hands raised.
Thank you. Director Schisler?
My bad.
Thank you. Director Kemp?
Mine's down too, thanks.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
It's okay, mine's down also, sorry.
Okay, thank you. All right, this concludes the agenda. Is there any old business? New business? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
A participant has left the meeting.